Hey guys, it's me, Eodgamer here, and this is my ultimate guide in terms of all Lightcones in Honkai Star Rail. We'll be mainly focusing on the 5 stars as well as 4 stars. I have the data bank here, so even those that we don't have on the account, we'll still be talking about them. Go ahead and bookmark this video if you're interested whenever you get like a new Lightcone and you want to figure out who exactly can use it for and you want maybe a bit of sense of direction as well. We won't be talking about the 3-star Lightcones. We have another video on the channel already to highlight like some important ones. I'll link up in the video card above if you're interested in like 3-star Lightcones. But now let's go in terms of like the order in terms of classes. We'll start off with the Abundance class and go across the board, and we will go into the respective classes as well. Do check on the timestamps below. I will name like every single Lightcone. You can just control find or search it up. You'll be able to find the right Lightcone that you're looking for. And without further ado, let's get into the first one, which is Post-Op Conversation. Now, Post-Op Conversation gives a very nice generic energy restoration rate by 8%, which is generally useful by all characters because energy regen is very versatile. The Outgoing Healing, on the other hand, in terms of like only when they use their ultimate, is a bit more niche. We might not know like how many other Abundance characters in future is able to use this, but for now I think Natasha as well as Bailu uses it very well. Lorta doesn't really heal as much in his ultimate, more so in his skill as well as his passive as well. So I think that is something to take note when you have this Lightcone. But overall, I think if you are running Natasha, definitely a good generic Lightcone to have. Next up, we have Perfect Timing, the one with Lorta in the background over here. So this one is very clear. It gives a very straightforward effect resistance of 16%. Very nice to have a bit more resistance to debuffs, and an outgoing healing by an amount that is equal to 30% or 33% of effect rest. So for characters who generally like scale with effect resistance, maybe they have like other damage and stuff, I think you will see quite good value in terms of combining that effect rest and giving you additional healing as well. And it's up to 15% as well. So I think this is a bit more niche in terms of which characters can use this. For now, I don't think that Natasha or Bailu will find tremendous value in it in terms of their overall kit. But of course, more effect resistance means that they might be able to prevent, for example, defense break or some weakness breaking on them to prevent them from taking turns, frozen and stuff like that. Just add a little bit more reliability. If you are facing content, for example, where the opponents are stacking a lot of debuff on your characters, having a bit more effect resistance might be a way to counter that, and we might see this becoming far more useful, especially when the time goes by as well. Next up, we have Quid Pro Quo. The one with Bailu in the background. Not sure if I pronounced this right, but anyway, this one regenerates at the start of the wearer's turn 8 energy for a random chosen ally whose current energy is lower than 50%. Note that this is only when it's below 50%, so if your team is like everyone is above 50% energy, you don't get this benefit. But free energy, 8 energy for a randomly chosen ally except the wearer, I think it's pretty solid. It's a good amount of energy distribution to a particular unit as well, although a bit based on RNG in general. I think it's a pretty good one. All characters generally can use this because its energy is very, very generic. Even Lorta, Natasha, or Bailu, they are all able to use it pretty well if you ask me. Next up, we have Shared Feeling, another Abundance Lightcone. This one also gives outgoing healing, but this is very generic to all of the characters across the board. In terms of abundant characters can use this main stat as well. Outgoing healing, very useful, doesn't matter whether it's skill, ultimate or passive ability. And when they use a skill, regenerates 2 energy for all allies as well. This is also really generic. There's no cap in terms of a 50% requirement. Very, very generic. I think all Abundance characters will really like this one. I might actually put it on most of my Abundance characters if I have this on my account as well. Okay, next up, the last 4-star Lightcone we have. This is a Battle Pass Lightcone in terms of warmth, shortens the Cold Nights. Increases the wearer's max HP by 16%, and also when using a basic attack or skill, restores all allies' HP by an equal amount to 2% of respective max HP. Especially if the healer is healing based on max HP or maybe does damage based on max HP and stuff. This main stat could be quite useful. Otherwise, I think outgoing healing might be more appropriate, especially if the character is just mainly like focused on healing and not so much on damage scaling as well. Basic attack or skill are very versatile in terms of most of the time you are either going to run a basic attack to help get more skill points for your rest of the team. For a healer like Natasha, Bailu, Lorta in general, Skill is also pretty useful. Sometimes they want to use it to add on like a little bit more healing. Restores all allies by an additional 2% of their respective max HP. Note that this is a respective max HP, so if the DPS, for example, maybe only has like 3k HP, that's probably around 60 HP additional healing. Might not be substantial, but it sure does adds up if like the turn does move on, and maybe there's like attrition damage you're trying to ignore as well. So those are the 4-star Lightcones. Let's talk a bit about this Time Waits for No One. This Bailu Lightcone, the 5-star one, you can gotten from like the shop right now in terms of exchanging the glitter for this one, 600 glitter. We will talk about it in like the shop guide as well on the channel to see like what are my opinions of the first and most important one to pick. But generally, rule of thumb is standard Lightcones, going for the one that character that you have, it usually tends to be the best case scenario. And in terms of Time Waits for No Ones, I think increasing wearer's max HP by 18% and outgoing healing by 12% is super good. It's already better than a lot of the 4-star Lightcones that we have talked about already. Very solid, definitely, together with its like 5-star stat scaling, does make the characters a lot more stronger as well. And not only that, when the wearer heals and allies, according to the amount of outgoing healing, the damage is then attacked onto a random enemy based on this outgoing healing. Good amounts of, in terms of changing your defensive stats and defensive character to add a little bit more offensive ability to the battlefield as well. It's also like in line with like how Lota is more of like an offensive healer. Could find good value in him as well, especially if you're stacking up a little bit of outgoing healing bonus, and if you're running like, for example, the set and stuff, definitely does make it pretty interesting to combine as well. Overall, very solid, can be used on Natasha, can be used on Bailu, can be used on Lota, especially if you're running the 4-piece relic set, which increases outgoing healing. Those are my thoughts in terms of abundance Lightcones so far. Next up, let's talk about preservation Lightcones. We start off with Day 1 of My New Life. Day 1 of My New Life is a very solid one in the sense that not only does it give the wearer more stats in terms of 16% wearer's defense, but also gives a damage resistance to the entire party of 8%. So note that this is not stackable, which means you are better off like keeping one in each side, for example 2 copies, and then trying to superimpose the rest of it. So just keep 2 separate ones will be good enough for the most part as well. So it's not stackable, which means you can't like have many, but you can always stack it on top of other damage reducing items, like for example the 4-piece Guard of Withering Snow, or 2-piece Guard of Withering Snow rather. All defender characters can use it, like Gepard, March 7th, Fire MC, all really quite, you like this Lightcone. I think it's very versatile, very nice fit into a lot of team building situations where you are receiving, for example, AoE damage that you're trying to mitigate as well. Next up, we have Landau's Choice, another preservation Lightcone. The wearer is more likely like drawing aggro, and damage reduction is reduced by 16%. I think this is a very solid one, especially for characters with very thick shield that can ignore, for example, AoE splash damage that the opponents are creating. One of the biggest issues of like preservation characters is if, for example, they draw the aggro and they get the splash damage, definitely someone else is going to take the damage. So you can't really like purely rely on one defender alone, especially if your shield is not thick enough to help sustain the splash damage. This one I think will be really strong on Gepard, since his shield is thick enough to allow a lot of the rest of the team to mitigate a lot of the splash damage. Damage taken reduced by 16%. This is like double the amount that we saw from Day 1 of My New Life. Very, very strong Lightcone as well. I think it's pretty solid. Trend of the universal market and preservation Lightcone. This one, similarly to Day 1 of My New Life, increases the wearer's defense also. This one is by 16%, and when the wearer is attacked, this creates like a bit more offensive scenario where you have a little bit of DOT aspect from your preservation characters, which is nice to have if you want a little bit more exposure into a damage over time team as well. So when the wearer is attacked, there's a 100% base chance to burn the enemy. For each turn, the wearer deals DOT 40% of their defense for 2 turns. I think that any character that if you're planning to put in a DOT team will find quite good value in this. And so far, I think in terms of the DOT teams we have of like Kafka, Sampo, maybe we talk about Hook as well, some maybe Asta. I think Gepard is going to find a lot of value in these kind of team compositions because he naturally has a bit of aggro drawing in his kit, good amounts of shielding across the board, can definitely utilize this burn as well, since he does like to stack quite a bit of defense. The other 2 characters, March 7th as well as Fire MC, I think March 7 might be a little bit better, especially when frozen. You might get a bit more chance to proc these frozen as well. I'm sure this is also has something to do in terms of effect hit rate will be applied on the enemy, especially if that enemy has high effect resistance. I think Mark 7 would be slightly better if this light cone in that setting compared to Fire MC. But I think all could work well, especially if you're trying to find this a niche. Could be interesting. It does change up the team comps quite a bit, this light cone, and a lot of exploration has yet to be explored. Maybe once we see Kafka coming to the game, Trend of Universal Market might actually be a bit more interesting to look at. Next up, we have We Are Wildfire. At the start of battle, all damage dealt to all allies is reduced by 8% for 5 turns. And on top of that, immediately restores HP to all allies equal to 30% of the respective difference of their max HP and current HP. So this one is basically like the Day 1 of My New Life, damage reduction of 8%, and this stacks. So you can use We Are Wildfire and Day 1 of My New Life to be able to have this like additional damage resistance for the entire team as well. Although it's only for 5 turns, so it's better for like short fights rather than like drawn out fights that drag on for a little bit of time, for example like Memory Chaos, Simulated Universe. I think all 3 characters are definitely able to utilize this. Damage reduction is definitely favorable for team-wide dynamics as well. And at the same time, HP restoration, this one is really if you are running a lot of matches, for example maybe in the earlier parts of the Simulated Universe when you are trying to clear content that is hard and you want to just a bit more sustain in terms of your team composition. I think this is pretty useful as well, just giving us a little bit more of sustain to drag on the match. It will be useful especially if you combine together with some destruction buffs in the Simulated Universe. So those are like some things to consider about, since it doesn't full heal you and destruction generally doesn't like us being at full health anyway. This allows you to not run a healer if you have to. But other than that, for like major boss fights or major Memory of Chaos fights, I don't think we will see tons of value in this turn limitation or requirement of like starting the battle kind of thing. Next up, we have This Is Me. This is a Battle Pass Preservation Light Cone. And in terms of This Is Me, it has also a similar defense increase of 16% as the other two we've seen so far, and increases the damage dealt of the wearer when they use their ultimate by 60% of the wearer's defense. Now this is definitely not going to be used by Gepard because it's based on ultimate damage, increase the damage of the wearer when they use the ultimate. So Gepard doesn't have damage in his ultimate ability. Fire MC and March 7 could use this one a little bit more, and it allows them to shift a lot more of their defensive stat to more offensive ones. I think out of all of them, it might be the best for March 7 as well, because a lot of her split scaling is being reduced, especially when she can utilize that huge defensive stat that generally preservation light cones have quite a large number of as well. I think it's pretty solid if you're a March 7 main, you really like her. I think it's worth picking up at least one copy of this if you are willing to pay for the battle pass. Fire MC of course can use it as well, especially if you're looking for a little bit more damage in your team composition. Maybe you don't need that much sustain because maybe you're running Natasha or another healer in the particular team as well. And now let's talk about the two 5-star light cones. We'll talk about Textures of Memories first. Textures of Memories is a 5-star preservation light cone that can be gotten from the Herta shop. It's one of the ones that you can get after you clear Simulated Universe, at least World 4, and thereafter every week we will get amount of tickets to redeem for more of these later on as well. Increase effect resistance by 8%, and if the wearer has no shield, they basically gain a shield for free if they are attacked. And if they have a shield, then the damage that they take is reduced by 12%. A good amount of variability in terms of allowing you to have a shield uptime a bit more. This is good especially if you're in the Simulated Universe and you want to get buffs from the preservation path that allows you to have more buffs if you have a shield equipped. This is pretty nice. Only can be triggered once every 3 turns though, so you definitely want a little bit slightly faster character. I think all 3 characters can use this light cone in terms of Gepard, March 7th as well as Fire MC. All 3 can use this decently well if you are not maybe wanting the other 4-star light cones. In my opinion, like the biggest benefit of this Textures of Memory would definitely have to be its 5-star stat scaling versus the rest, and it's a free light cone to get. So for example, if you don't have a lot of other 4-star alternatives, you could always run 5-star in like one of them, and the other one you can always pass to another character in terms of 4-star light cone. Gives a good amount of account versatility as well. Wouldn't be my top priority though. Last but not least, we have Moment of Victory, Gepard design light cone. This can be gotten from the standard shop as well, in terms of the exchanging 600 glitter for any of the standard light cones. At Superimposition 1, it increases the wearer's defense by 24% and increases at effect hit rate by 24% as well. This is nice, especially for Gepard, because he does want to proc his freeze. March 7 could use this as well in terms of the effect hit rate and defense stats. Definitely nice for her as well. Increase the chance of the wearer to be attacked, so it's just an increased aggro chance. All three the preservation characters so far that we have, March 7, Fire MC as well as Gepard, all already have some kind of taunting, so this just makes it a lot nicer, especially if you want to like dedicate the damage to one particular person, especially if, for example, you're running multiple taunting like characters as well. When the wearer is attacked, increase defense by extra 24% until the end of the wearer's turn. Very nice if you have a character that is able to convert a lot of defensive stats over into offensive ones. One that comes to mind will be like Gepard, who converts it a little bit, and also Fire MC converts it quite a bit as well. March 7 of course doesn't convert it as well in terms of defense to offensive stats as well in that sense as well. Next up we have Harmony Lightcones. Now let's first talk about Memory of the Past, a Harmony Lightcone. In terms of his Superimposition 1, he has increased the wearer's break effect by 28%. When the wearer attacks, additionally regenerates 4 energy for themselves. This can be triggered 1 time per turn. This is actually a pretty generic one, especially if you're maybe running like Asta, who does quite a lot of fire weakness breaking. This can be quite useful, especially if you don't have other options as well. And when you attack, regenerates 4 energy to give you a little bit more uptime in terms of you using the ultimate. All 3 characters generally will be able to use this quite well to varying degrees depending on how well they can actually want to utilize the weakness breaking effect. I think out of all of them, Asta stands out and Bronya probably will be the lowest, since she only has one ability, which is her basic attack, that is able to cause like windbreak damage. Next up, Planet Rendezvous. I think this one is a pretty interesting one, especially if we are slowly starting to see a shift into more mono elemental teams. It has Asta on the picture, and definitely I think Asta is probably the one that will use it the best in terms of currently, especially since Asta does give quite a lot of fire damage bonus in one of her major traces as well to team members. So this is definitely going to be good if you're running mono teams. I think all 3 of them at some point in the game will definitely use it well. Although currently I think that Asta will use it the best because there's a defender and a lot of DPS in the same element, like Hook, you have Himiko, you have Fire MC as well as Asta, who complete out all 4, very balanced. And also I think Tingyun is going to use it quite well in terms of mono elemental teams, because we have Bailu, who's like a defensive unit, you have Tingyun, who is a support offensive unit, you have Jingyuan, you have Serval, and eventually Kafka as well. A very good amount of balance, and of course not to forget Arlen too, who is also very strong in terms of a bit of splash, a lot of single target damage. So I think these 2 characters are the ones that will benefit most from this as of 1.0, but definitely Bronya could eventually use this as well if you wanted to play maybe a pure win team in future too. Next up we have Dance Dance Dance. This one is a really strong one. I think it's very universal in terms of when a wearer uses their ultimate ability, all allies' actions are advanced forward by 16%. Super strong. Generally all 3, Bronya, Tingyun as well as Asta, will be using their ultimate quite well and want to keep quite high uptimes on it, and this definitely does make a very very strong utilization. It just bumps up everyone faster. Super strong Lightcone, and in fact Superimposition 1 is already solid enough. As you can see, most of them double when they have more Superimpositions, but not this Lightcone. When we switch it up, it only goes to like 50% more, which is 24. Okay, next up we have Past and Future, another Harmony Lightcone. So when the wearer uses their skill, then the next ally taking action deals 16% increased damage for 1 turn. This is going to be very useful, especially for example if you are using it on Bronya, who if you use it to buff up, you can actually get that increased damage. You can use it for Tingyun also. Asta is a little bit more conditional. You do need to speed tune your team a little bit in terms of making sure that the one that goes directly after Asta is the main damage dealer to take use of this. But I think with a little bit of like fine tuning, you can actually get quite a lot of these damage increase. Is this damage better than a 16% advance forward in terms of dance? I don't know. That's up to us to decide, depending on whether it's a hyper carry team comp or not. But those are some things to consider. I think all 3 will use it better, will use it quite well, and Bronya and Tingyun probably will use it much better than Asta, in my opinion. Okay, last but not least, we have Carve of the Moon. Carve the Moon and Weave the Clouds, a Battle Pass Lightcone for Harmony, a 4-star one. So what is this? Like an RNG basis one. Whenever you start the battle, in terms of wearer's turn begins, you then apply a random effect, either increasing attack, crit damage, or additional energy restoration rate. And of course, there are some other like terms and conditions where how it will actually be applied and how it will be reapplied in terms of other effects. I think this is a bit more RNG one, is a bit more situational. If you have a team, for example, that is able to utilize most of these stats, maybe you have like a multiple DPS character team, I think this is going to be pretty useful since your main DPS is going to use all of them. But for example, if maybe two out of 4 characters are more defensive, or for example like you're only focusing on 1 DPS, a lot of the times the crit damage that you get in terms of this buff is not going to be quite well utilized by majority of the team, especially if you're running like 3 supports and 1 hyper carry kind of thing, because a lot of supports don't have that crit rate to dish out this crit damage, which means you'll already be running at a 2/3 efficiency in terms of getting this passive. There are no other bonuses, so this is really like what you're looking for in terms of the bonus stats. It's very nice to have, very solid as well, 4-star substats as well. I think out of all of them, probably the best for Ting Yun, since she does offer good amounts of damage as well to lower the count in terms of the support count that don't really do much damage. So she does quite a bit of damage in terms of Ting Yun, and definitely can use this one quite well. Asta uses it pretty decently as well, since she also does okay amounts of damage. Might build crit rate later on if you want to build her a bit more offensively and got other stats checked. Bronya, I think, will be probably the lowest. She could use all 3 stats very well, but she generally doesn't do too much basic attacking in her team compositions as well. So those are my thoughts for the 4-star Lightcones. Last but not least, we have But the Battle is Over. But the battle isn't over. This is a Bronya Lightcone 5-star, can be gotten from the standard shop if you exchange 600 glitter already as well. We have more shop guides already, so go and check on the channel if you're interested, or perhaps I'll be making one and I'll be linking in the video card above as well. So this one increases energy restoration rate by 10% and regenerates 1 skill point when a wearer of the uses their ultimate on an ally, can only be triggered for every 2 users of the wearer's ultimate. This is really nice because you just get straight up energy regeneration rate, which Bronya, Ting Yun as well as Esta all like. 1 skill point, very useful. It helps just provide more resources to entire team in terms of utilizing skill points. Good for characters that like to use skill points in your team composition. For example, if you're playing like Ting Chue, who likes to drink quite a bit of skill points as well, or even Esta herself, who does tend to like a bit of skill points to use her skill more often. So in a sense, when the wearer uses their skill also, their next ally taking action deals 30% more damage. This is much stronger than the 4-star one that we saw in terms of this gimmick that we have here. It's good for Bronya, good for Ting Yun. I think Esther will find least value in this, as you really need to like speed tune your team a little bit more in terms of this second effect. But overall, I think this is definitely probably best in slot for a lot of 5-star, a lot of Harmony characters, if you don't really care too much about action advance in terms of dance, or maybe you don't want to run like a mono team. I think it's pretty solid, but those are my thoughts for the Harmony Lightcones. Nihility Lightcones. Okay, so let's first start off with Good Night, Sleep Well. And the most important thing to know about Nihility is that there is actually a divergence in the way the characters are. Some of them do DOT, some of them are mainly focused on debuffing. But by and large, all Nihility characters do apply a level of debuff on the enemy and also are able to utilize this damage increase stat. So all 5, Sampo, Pella, Silver Wolf, well, as well as Kafka, are all able to utilize this additional damage, especially if you want them to come in a little bit more as like a secondary damage dealer kind of thing in the team composition. Pretty solid to have if you don't have like a more specialized one for the characters as well. And speaking of specialized, let's go on to Eyes of the Prey, the one with Sampo in the background. This one's a bit more niche in the sense that you really want to be focusing a lot on DOT. Characters that come to mind are like Kafka as well as Sampo, who really want to dish out quite a bit of damage over time effects as well. Note that it's only for the character, so it doesn't mean your team members have damage over time. They don't benefit directly from this light cone, so this is in a sense a little bit more selfish just for that particular character's DPS. Of course, if you really wanted to, you could run just the first effect on all of them, because all of them do apply effect hit rate bonuses. They do like it as well in terms of their kit for other Nihility characters. Those are my thoughts for Eyes of the Prey. Next up, we have Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat, another Nihility light cone that is 4-star, and this one is very good in terms of it allows you to, for example, ensnare enemies, lowering their defense by 12% for 1 turn. Generally, you will want characters that have a more AoE aspect to get more utilization out of this, since it doesn't specify whether it's 1 unit or many units. So I would think that characters that could use this, probably all of them will be able to utilize this, especially since defense lowering means that the rest of your team does more damage. Overall, a really solid one. I think all 5 characters can use this quite well. Kafka, Sampo, Pella, well, as well as Silver Wolf. This defense decrease rather is also able to compound upon like those Pella ones as well as Silver Wolf ones. It even allows like Weld to do both speed down and defense down in his kit. Pretty interesting. I do think it's a really solid Lightcone for Nihility characters as well. Next up, we have another, a bit more specialist one in terms of Fermata. Fermata, it increases the break effect dealt by the wearer by 16%. All of them generally do some sort of breaking damage in their kit, so this is quite versatile in that sense. But the second part is like only when it's affected by shock or wind shear, then it's increased by 16%. Although it also applies to DOT, the fact that it's only included in terms of shock and wind shear does make it a little bit more niche compared to other ones. I think characters that definitely will be able to use this, for example, will be like Kafka as well as Sampo, who do shock and wind shear respectively as well. And next up we have We Will Meet Again, the one Silver Wolf in the background. This is a battle pass Lightcone as well, so you have to, it's pay to play. After the wearer uses a basic attack or skill, it has another additional effect that allows you to deal more damage to a random enemy. This is pretty strong, especially if you're fighting like a single target and all that damage is focused on a primary unit that doesn't have like the option of like choosing which enemy to choose in terms of that randomness. I think characters that generally want to be more offensive in nature in terms of a secondary DPS role will definitely use this quite well. All of them generally use it quite well because all 5 characters, Weld, Kafka, Sampo, Pella, as well as Silver Wolf, all do want to build a bit of attack as well to do a lot of damage on the side. I think it also works pretty well, but then again, it's a pay-to-play Lightcone as well because it's from the Battle Pass. Last Lightcone for Nihility in terms of 5-star Lightcones. This can be gotten from the standard shop if you exchange 600 glitters for it as well. In the Name of the World, the Weld background one, and it increases damage to debuff enemies by 24%. This is universal across all Nihility characters. Generally, they will be inflicting some sort of debuff as well, and then having additional attack damage increase on these targets are very helpful as well. When the wearer uses a skill, the effect hit rate of this attack increases by 18% and attack increases by 24%. So this is basically focused on their skill, especially if a lot of the debuffing comes from the skill. Very useful in a sense. A lot of characters also have quite a bit of debuffing from the skill. The only exception probably will be Pella out of the 5 of them, whose main debuff mainly comes from her ultimate ability, which defense break the enemies in their entirety. So that is like the only exception. Other than that, Silver Wolf, Weld, Sampo and Kafka does utilize their skill a little bit as well, so I think it's definitely very good value for the rest of them. But overall, even for Pella, I think the additional defense on debuff enemies is tons of value, especially if she's a secondary damage dealer as well. Good 5-star stat scaling for a class that generally wants to do a little bit more damage than be more of a supportive role as well. So good things to consider for this Lightcone. Hunt Lightcones, only silence remains. Now we have 4 Hunt characters and all of them mainly play around the same way with a bit of exceptions. I'll explain about that in a little bit. So only silence remains gives a very general attack increase by 16%, and if there are 2 or fewer enemies on the field, increases whereas crit rate by 12%. I think that this can be used by all of the characters since generally Hunt class does want a little bit more attack and crit rate in general, except 2 exceptions. I think Yanqing, who generally tends to overcap on crit quite quickly, might not like this 12%, especially if you're hitting that threshold of 100% crit already from like his passive as well as ultimate ability. So those are some things to consider. Other than that, Zila also might not fully utilize this additional crit rate since she does like to play especially into matches that have like multiple enemies as well. And if you're running this, you kind of like offset. If you don't get that action advance because you're killing all squishies, you will lose, for example, this crit rate, and it's a trade-off that you have to choose as well. So those are the only 2 exceptions. Other than that, a pretty generic light code that can be applied to most of the Hunt characters we have so far. Swordplay. Now, Swordplay is a Susang background Lightcone, and this one requires you to hit the same target consecutively non-stop in order to get the max stacking bonus as well. The moment you change the target, you'll be dispelled, and this is the same. This is similar in terms of their strengths because Hunt characters tend to hit a single target, but a lot of the times, especially if you're fighting harder matches, you will realize that a lot of the boss mechanics come also from like the sub monsters that they summon. For example, Savarok summons the hand, and Cocolia summons those ice shards that you want to destroy as soon as possible. And one thing to take note is the moment you switch to like take out these high value sub targets, you will lose this entire 40%, up to 40% stacking bonus. So that, in my opinion, is like the biggest downside for this Lightcone. But overall, I think characters that can use this one, probably Su-Sang will use it best, since she really does like attacking and can stack up those attacks really quickly. Zila might not be able to use this as well, since she does change targets, especially since she likes to focus down on squishies. Danheng is probably like the second best together with Yenqing in order for using this. Yenqing does like to use this because he has no crit rate in terms of his substats, so definitely he will find a lot of value from this one, especially if he can keep hitting the same target as well. So those are like my thoughts in terms of swordplay. And next up, subscribe for more. I really think this is a solid Lightcone in terms of its name already, and if you guys are finding value in this video so far, do like and subscribe for more of such future content as well. But now back to subscribe for more in terms of the Lightcone. Increases damage of basic attack and skill by 24%. This is very generic, all 4 can use it. The part that I don't really like personally is this effect is increased by another 24% when the wearer energy is full. Generally, out of all 4 of them, no one really likes to hold on to their ultimate ability. So if you have it up most of the time, you will tend to use it. And I'm not too sure whether this additional 24% is actually good value, because you lose the energy restoration from acting just to get this a bit of extra damage. To each their own, I guess. I think this is a pretty generic one nonetheless, because it can be used by all 4 characters and it's not really much of a huge requirement. The question is, do you want the additional bonus that it offers? Next up, we have River Flows in Spring, the Yenqing background 4-star Lightcone that we have. After entering battle, increases the wearer's speed by 8% and damage by 12%. Very, very good. But when the wearer takes damage, this effect will disappear and will, of course, come back again after the end of the wearer's next turn. This is solid, especially if you're running with a character, for example, like Gepard, who doesn't really want to allow their teammates to take damage. Very solid in that sense. Yenqing has reduced aggro, Su-Sang has reduced aggro as well. I think most Hun characters have some sort of reduced aggro in their kit, but out of all of them, I think Yenqing will like this the most, since his kit really revolves around not taking damage. Next up, Return to Darkness, a 4-star Battle Pass Lightcone. This is pay to play, you have to get it from the Battle Pass as well. It gives a crit rate of 12%, and after there's a crit hit, there's a 16% fixed chance to dispel a buff. This allows your character who's using this Lightcone to be a bit more supportive in nature, where you can not only perhaps like Danheng, where you slow the enemies, but you can also have a chance of reducing buffs on the enemies, making them a bit more utility rather than just purely unga bunga DPS as well. I think Danheng can use this one the best, and out of all of them, I think Yenqing is going to be the worst at this, because he can't really utilize the crit rate as well. Zila and Su-Sang are a bit even in terms of this one, as they could definitely use the crit rate stats, as well as it's always nice to have a bit of a fixed chance to dispel one buff from target as well. And note that this is 1 time per attack, and generally Su-Sang as well as Zila do take quite a bit of attacks, so you get quite a good chance of proccing this dispelling of buffs as well. Very, very strong one, especially in the right situation. Next up, a 5-star free-to-play Lightcone. This can be gotten from the Herta shop, especially after you clear World 4 in the simulation room from the first time thereafter. And you can also superimposition it to 5, and that's like a side bonus as a free-to-play player as well. It increases crit rate by 8%, and all the way up to 5 if you complete all of the tickets exchange. It goes up to 16%. We'll look at 16%. We'll look at the imposition 5 because everyone will be able to guarantee this at 5 later on as well. So increase wearer's rate by 16% and increases crit rate against enemies with HP less than or equal to 50% by an extra 16%. So a very good amounts of chunks of crit rate, especially if the enemy boss is getting at lower life, you start dealing a lot more chance of crit rate as well. And for example, when you defeat enemy, you get a very nice amount of attack buff for the character as well. This is probably best used by all characters except Yenqing. He doesn't really like this 32% crit rate stat, which is a pity because this is a free-to-play Lightcone, and not being able to utilize like a free-to-play Lightcone is a bit of a setback. But overall, I don't think it's that big of a difference. When you kill a target 40%, this is generally nice to have, especially if a character like Zila, who generally also doesn't mind like defeating a target and going again, who also gets a compounding buff on top of that, her own buffs that increase damage. I think Zila will definitely use this quite well, but all 3 characters generally will like all these stats quite well as well. Okay, next up, let's talk about the standard Han Lightcone, Sleep Like the Dead, the Yanqing background one, and this is can be gotten from the standard shop if you exchange 600 glitter for it as well. It increases the crit damage by 30%. This is excellent, especially most of the characters don't really scale, don't really build low amounts of crit rate. They build quite a bit of crit rate to be able to crit quite often, the Han class characters in general. And Yanqing does love this crit damage quite a bit. He already has a lot of crit rate in terms of his kit already. But when he doesn't crit, like for example, you use a basic attack or skill, does not crit, there is then an increased chance of 36% to have this crit rate increase for next one, just making your next ones a little bit more consistent. I think the one that stands out definitely would be the crit damage buff that it provides. Can be used by all 4 of them, and I think it's pretty generic and quite solid for most characters as well. If we follow a 1-to-2 ratio, there's a 15% crit rate at already just a level 1, superimposition 1. Good 5-star stats as well, I think probably better than most 4-star Lightcones as well. Last but not least, we have In the Night. This is a limited edition sealer Lightcone from her banner, and basically it gives quite a bit of crit rate. It gives 18%, one of the highest based on superimposition 1 that we see so far. And when the wearer is in battle, for every 10 speed that exceeds 100, up to of course 160 speed because it stacks up to 6 times, the damage increases by 6%, maximum is 36%. And the crit damage of their ultimate is increased by 12%, maximum of 72% if you get the max stacks. Very solid because all of them do like to have a lot of movement speed as well. Su-Sang with her Eidolon 6 can also stack 2 stacks of speed buff, giving her already like 147 without a speed boot in terms of just a pure self-inflicting speed buffs. So very, very solid. All of them generally has quite a bit of speed in their kit and speed up also in their kit. So I think is very, very solid. The only problem is this crit rate, which Yanqing might not like too much because it is quite a lot of crit rate and he overcaps on crit very quickly. So those are my thoughts in terms of the Han class Lightcones. Erudition Lightcones. Let's first start off with Herta's Lightcone, the Birth of a Self. Now this one is a bit more niche in terms of being able to proc only for a specific follow-up characters that utilize follow-up abilities. Out of the 5 of them that we have currently in the game, Jingyuan, Herta, as well as Himiko probably will be able to use this effect. Serval as well as Tingque might not be able to use this as well, so I'll leave them out in terms of the discussion for this conversation here. In terms of damage, it increases 24% of follow-up, and if the enemy is below 50%, you increase the follow-up damage by 24% further. This 48% damage increase for follow-up is extremely massive, especially for characters who utilize this follow-up ability most of their kit. I think out of all of them come to mind, Herta probably can use this the best in terms of her kit revolving around her spinning guru things, and most of the time she will only do it when the target is below 50% health. So I think out of all of them, Herta is definitely pretty good. Jingyuan as well as Himiko might find this also pretty useful, especially if they are dealing quite a bit of damage in terms of follow-up ability as well. But I think other Lightcones might be better, but let's take a look. Next up, we have Make the World Clamor, Serval's Lightcone. Now, this one gives the wearers regenerate 20 energy the moment you enter a battle and increases ultimate damage by 32%. Generally, out of all of them, I think that the characters that damage from their ultimate will find this quite useful, and all 5 characters, in terms of Erudition characters, do have some form of damage here. But the only downside to this Lightcone is a bit restrictive in terms of only when you enter the battle, then you get this 20 energy bonus, which I don't think is fantastic, especially if you're going for long, drawn-out fights. Generally, out of all of them, I think they mainly can use it quite well. There are other Lightcones that are valid, but I do think that this is a pretty solid first Lightcone to put on a lot of Erudition characters that we have as well. This is one, in my opinion, one of the main reasons why they left it as the web event, the pre-release web event reward, because it's very, very versatile, generic in that sense, but it does have its shortcomings as well. All 5 characters can use this, but we'll take a look at the next Lightcone. Genius Repose. This one increases attack by 16% straight up the bat, and when the wearer defeats an enemy, you gain a crit damage increase of 24% for 3 turns. This is a slightly more later game Lightcone because generally the crit rate is very difficult to find, and especially for Erudition characters who don't have a lot of crit rate in their substats, tracers and stuff like that. This one does take a while to come into the battlefield. So for the most part, I would say that this is a pretty late game one. But once you reach late game, pretty solid because they do defeat enemies quite often. Being Erudition characters, you generally play them into fights with multiple enemies, and because of their huge amounts of damage, they tend to be the one that usually eliminates the enemies as well. So I think it's a pretty good one for all 5 of them in general, and definitely going to be a pretty solid one, especially heading into a end game kind of state with more crit rate in our kits as well. Seriousness of Breakfast. I think this is probably like the most generic one that all can use. In terms of like the most generic is a fair upgrade to make the world Clamor, the one in Serval's background. This is a free to play one. You can get it from the Forgotten Hall. In terms of after you clear stages in the memory, you can pick it up by exchanging in the shop. You can find it there all the way on the right as well. I totally remember that by now. Increases the wearer's damage by 12%. A very, very good neutral amounts of damage increase. All across the board, all 5 characters like this in terms of the Erudition class, and whenever you defeat an enemy, you just gain an attack stacking bonus as well. This is good in the early game as well as late game, as you, for example, maybe don't have enough crit rate to utilize a lot of the crit damage stat. Having damage bonus as well as attack is very, very versatile. You don't really have to have that huge amounts of crit rate. Very nice as for them to add this as a free to play light cone in the Forgotten Hall. All 5 characters use this very well as well. Next up, we have today is another peaceful day. It really is. And in terms of this light cone, this is a battle pass light cone, a pay to play. And what this does is also very generic. Like the moment you enter battle, your wearer's damage increase is based on max energy. This is max energy, so not like the amount of energy you currently have. And generally, most of them have quite a bit of energy cost. For example, Tincture in the picture here is like 140. Serval is towards the lower end of the spectrum, which is like already 100. Even at 100, it's also a 20% damage increase straight up the bat. And not only like ultimate, but scale, basic attack and stuff like that. So at least it gives it a bit more variation, and it's very generic. Probably I would say it's like one of the best in 4-star light cones in terms of general use. But of course, then again, it's a pay-to-play light cone. Not everyone's paying money for the game as well. All can be used on all 5 Erudition characters. Next up, let's talk about Night on the Milky Way. This is a Himiko light cone, can be gotten from the standard shop if you exchange 600 glitter for it as well. And in terms of this one, increases the for every enemy on the field up to 5, you actually gain a wearer's attack by 9%. So it's up to 45%. And when the enemy is like weakness broken, the damage dealt by the wearer increases by 30% for 1 turn. Pretty solid if you ask me, especially since most of the Erudition characters are going into matches with tons of enemies as well. And this additional a gimmick of like weakness breaking increases good amounts of damage, 30%. This is unconditional in terms of doesn't matter whether it's your basic attack, skill, follow-up, or ultimate ability as well. Very, very solid light cone. Of course, with very good 5-star stats as well. Pretty solid if you ask me. I think that this is probably an attractive one to put on a lot of Erudition characters if you don't have any other options available as well. Very solid 5-star stats. Probably I would shift it as well if I had it. Next up, we have a limited light cone before dawn. This is Jingyuan's limited light cone that can be pulled when he was on his banner as well. And in terms of this light cone, increases crit damage by 36% and increases the wearer's skill and ultimate damage by 16% as well, or 18% as well. Very solid, especially if you're scaling towards the end game where you really can utilize crit damage a lot more as our substats, main stats get a bit more perfect in terms of getting the right combination of everything, and good amounts of skill and ultimate damage that all of them actually does in terms of the kit. The only one who doesn't really utilize skill damage probably would be Tincture. The rest of them do use their skill in terms of damaging from both of them, quite often skill and ultimate. And after they use this like skill or ultimate, they gain this effect, the Somnus Corpus, and upon triggering a follow-up attack, Somnus Corpus deals a follow-up damage of 48%. This is very, very massive. Of course, a character like Herta won't be able to continuously utilize this since this is only because it's skill or ultimate, but generally for Himiko and Jingyuan, you can kind of control this a little bit more. So I think it's going to be far better for characters like Himiko as well as Jingyuan in order to use all of the stats. 5-star light cone stats as well. Very, very solid, good endgame light cone. Probably the best out of all the light cones, but without a doubt, because it's quite expensive to get, being a limited light cone as well. But other than that, I think other characters can definitely find value in the 5-star stats, as well as the crit damage and maybe some damage buffing, even if you don't utilize the follow-up attacks. For example, like Tincture, Serval don't really have much follow-up in their kit. Okay, next up we have the World Welcomes You, the Destruction Light Cone, in Honkai Star Rail. 4-star Lightcone, and in terms of its passive ability, when you have a basic attack, skill, or ultimate, you gain 1 stack. And you can gain up to the 3 of them in order to gain like up to 36% attack bonus in terms of super imposition level 1. Pretty solid in terms of overall all 5 destruction characters, Blade, Arlen, Clara, as well as Hook, as well as Physical MC, all use all 3 in terms of their kit. Pretty strong if you ask me in terms of using all of this. In terms of like Blade can just use his skill and immediately attack also, so you can do proc it quite often as well. So I think this is a pretty generic one to start off with. The main question is, do you want attack percentage? Are you still in the early game, late game? Do you need more attack percentage because you don't have other sources? I think those are like key factors to consider, because a second Lightcone, Secret Vow, is going to be giving you damage increase as well. So damage increase is multiplicative in general, and damage increase by 20%, and when the target is of a less HP percentage than the character, you get an additional 20% damage increase for a total of 40%, versus of course prior we saw the attack percentage of 36% as well. But this one of course is a bit more conditional. It requires that a target to have a lower life than them, but in general, out of all of the characters, like the 5 destruction characters that we have, Clara, Arlen, as well as Blade do like to be at pretty low life, or rather they do tend to be at pretty low life, because Clara draws aggro, taking more hits. Blade has a lot of life steal in his kit, sacrificing his life to do damage, and Arlen of course will always like to be at lower life. That's why it's also his background in the picture. Physical MC and Hook on the other hand don't really utilize this second part as well, unless for some reason you're running maybe in the simulated universe with the Path of Destruction abilities as well. Next up, Under the Blue Sky, another destruction 4-star Lightcone, increases the wearer's attack by 16% unconditionally, and when they defeat a target, they actually gain a bit of crit rate. This is nice to have, especially crit rate early on is of course very useful. 1 turn is pretty short though to defeat a target, and I do think it's a little bit more niche to proc in a sense. Of course destruction characters do tend to eliminate targets quite often because of their amazing amounts of damage, but then again limiting it 1 turn means that more often than not you might not have this uptime, because you have to be constantly killing targets in order to have this crit rate uptime as well. In my opinion, all 5 characters can of course use this, but a lot of it has to do with like comparison. To have generally generic, I'll put it on most characters can use it for start as well. Next up we have Woof, Walk Time. Peppy Lightcones are always very nice to have in terms of aesthetics, but let's see how it works in terms of his kits. So it increases wearer's attack by 10% and also increases their damage to enemies inflicted by burn or bleed by 16%. Bleed is done by physical breaking and other DOT, physical DOT. Burn is of course by fire DOT, which means in a sense the general characters that can use this the best will be, for example, Clara, physical MC for most of the bleed proccing in terms of physical break, and of course Hook can use it a lot in terms of being able to proc burn and doing a lot of this like burn damage to get bonuses also. So 3 characters, the other 2 not so much. And of course 10% attack is pretty low. You can find it better in like other Lightcones that we have mentioned about as well. And next up we have Nowhere to Run. This is a pay-to-play Battle Pass Lightcone. You have to actually buy the premium one to get it. And this increases the wearer's attack by 24%. It's much higher than the others we've seen in terms of unconditional, straight up just gaining that boost at turn 0. And whenever the wearer defeats an enemy, they restore a bit of HP. This is nice, especially if you are like want a bit more sustained killing targets as well. Pretty useful in terms of being more versatile, a bit more chunky as well, because you have a bit more sustain without like needing a dedicated healer and stuff like that. Who can use this? I think all 5 will be able to use this quite well. Of course, the damage increase is pretty generic, but generally, I think characters that want to heal up a bit more will be able to utilize the full stat of this. Characters like Blade, I think will do pretty well, combined together with his lifesteal in his kit as well. That huge amounts of healing just makes it much more beneficial for him as well. And he also has to skill off with attack. So all 5 of them currently do skill off with attack quite well. And out of all of them, I think Blade is the one that skills off the least. But of course, that as mentioned, that slight less healing doesn't matter as much because he already has lifesteal in his kit. All 5 can generally use this. A bit more conditional, maybe better for Arlen, Clara, as well as Blade, who tend to take more damage in their overall kit. Next up, we have the 5-star Lightcone on the Fall of an Aeon. So in terms of this free Lightcone, this can be gotten from the Herta shop. If you clear up to like Simulation World 4, you'll be able to exchange it from the shop and also eventually get this to Super Imposition 5. So I guess what we can do is see it both at 1 and 5 and compare the difference, since it's going to be a free-to-play obtainable at super in position 5. When the wearer attacks, their attack is increased by 8% in this battle, up to 4 times. So 8 times 4, that's already about the 32%, and at max it's like it doubles, so 32% becomes 64% as well, up to 4%. When there's a weakness broken on the enemy, the wearer's damage increased by 12% for 2 turns. This goes up to 24% for 2 turns, together with like a up to 4 times attack stack as well. As this is pretty massive if you ask me, a huge amounts of attack stat as well as a huge amounts of like a weakness break on the enemy. They gain damage increase also, so you get both attack increase and damage increase. I think this is a very, very excellent Lightcone to have. Not to mention it's also 5-star stat scaling, pretty solid on. Can be used by all 5 characters since there's no like real gimmick on requiring like a specific damage over time, no healing element meant for it. It's just weakness break, damage up, attack more, damage up. Very, very solid. And last but not least, we have something irreplaceable, Clara's Lightcone from the standard shop. You can get this if you exchange 600 glitter as well. We'll be doing a shop guide on the channel, so do check back if you're interested in that shop guide, or I'll perhaps link it in the video card above as well. In terms of this Lightcone, increases wearer's attack by 24%, very generic, like all characters use this. And when the wearer defeats an enemy or is hit, it immediately restores HP based on the wearer's attack. At the same time, wearer's damage is increased by 24% until the next turn. So if they are hit or they defeat an enemy, they will get a damage buff. And generally, out of all of them, I think aggro drawing ones guarantee this, as being hit, in my opinion, is easier than defeating an enemy since it works in terms of like boss fights as well. In that sense, if the boss has AoE, you can proc this quite well. But if you don't want to be dependent on like the boss typing and the enemy typing, for example, if they do a lot of single target damage, then Clara will probably be, of course, the best to use this. A nice amount of heal to make her a bit more chunky, sustain up as well. She does like a bit more sustain since she does want to take a bit of damage with a lot of damage reduction in her kit already. This cannot stack, and effect can only trigger 1 time per turn. So generally it scales better with a little bit more speed in terms of wanting to take your turns more often as well. Overall, I think it's best utilized by Clara in order to utilize all the stats. But based on like the sheer amounts of buffs it has, 24% damage increase as well as attack increase and a bit of sustain also, I think all characters can use this to varying degrees, as they tend to be hit quite often anyway, especially in harder fights. There's a lot of splash damage, especially just like put them beside a aggro drawing character, you will naturally get splash damage to proc this effect as well. And if you like such content, this was a lot to talk about, like and subscribe for more of such future videos as well. Do check out these 2 other videos which I think might be supplementary and helpful to what we've seen in this video. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.